Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the all-new Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one based on one of your new suggestions. This one having to do with a very fascinating suggestion, not just because of the amazing information pertaining to the subject, but also the fact that it's linked to the Monsterverse in a very loose way. This is the Monsterverse universe that is tied with the Godzilla and then also the Kong Skull Island films, and it all has to do with a mysterious location that we've seen in several of those movies. Now, it's not directly linked to it, but I thought it would make a great way to talk about the similarity between these two locations. But in this case, I'm going to talk about what you're looking at here now, or an interpretation of it. This is an island or an isle that is considered either A, existing even now, or maybe even never existing or never have existed. And I'll talk about that more as to what type of interpretations this island could have been. Fascinating information, though, is there's just so many ways that the theory of this existing or not could go, and it has to do with this. It's known as the Isle of Demons. Catchy name, huh, already when it comes to this particular subject matter. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating, interesting info associated with this mysterious island and all the urban legends tied to it too. Now, what was or is this Isle of Demons? I mentioned both was or is because even to this day, its existence is still being debated. Did it ever exist? Is it even there today, to this very day? It all has to do with various ideas and theories as to what occurred. Now, as far as its location, first let's talk about that here. So you have to go a little bit more north of North America, or a little bit south of a point in Canada near an area called Newfoundland, and that's purportedly where this Isle of Demons was located. In fact, as you're seeing here, like here's a possible location of where it was. It could have either consisted of just one island or maybe even two islands. It all depends, again, on the wide gamut of eyewitness experiences, and I mentioned that in quotations, over the past couple of centuries. In fact, what's interesting is that you have to go maybe to around 1500, 1600, maybe even up to the 17th century to be able to determine its true existence. This was apparently a time that people would see this island, and then afterward they didn't see it. Like today, for example, on Google Earth, or if you go to any of the other satellite type images, it won't show up there. But back then, that's apparently when this island existed, and that's what makes it so fascinating. It's the notion that maybe it could have been there all this time, or maybe it could have been something along the lines of illusions, or maybe there's even more mystical qualities associated with it. So much fascinating info when I was looking up this particular subject matter. But yes, this island would appear there, and it was talked about from some of the indigenous people that lived around that area. Everyone that knew of this area, either A, the people lived near that area, or B, the people that traveled by that area, because this was apparently a location that also had many ships that would go by it. Merchant ships, commercial ships, or ships that just had regular passengers. And throughout the centuries, this became an infamous island, and they knew to stay away from it. They had that unnatural sense to it, that creepiness, as far as what people talked about. It was apparently an island that people would avoid over those so many years. In fact, it could be actually considered more along the lines of a phantom island. Let's talk about that subject matter here too. A phantom island is an island, again, that was reported over a good number of years, and then for whatever reason is no longer there anymore. Various eyewitnesses would see the islands, and then they wouldn't afterward. So whether it truly existed, it could be that it was truly a large mass of some kind, maybe some kind of large island that was floating out there, or it could have been misinterpreted as something else altogether. Phantom islands just come and go, and they've been reported throughout several centuries, and they've been noted as either being truly existing or having something along the lines of optical illusions. And I'll mention that more here in a minute. Unfortunately, though, this island is a bad island. Remember, it was one that people were avoiding, and there were very, very probable causes as to why people avoid, not just the indigenous people that were known apparently as the First Nations people, but others would talk about some of the very bad things that were there. For example, here's some circumstances or some items that people would state were in that particular Isle of Demons. It's not called the Isle of Demons just out of nothing. That definitely has that ominous name for these exact reasons. For one, it's apparently inhibited by supernatural creatures, either creatures on the lines of spirits, both good and bad, tormented ghosts, those in other words that happen to drown within that ocean or the sea area surrounding it and just naturally cling to that island afterward. Or it could even be tied to something on the lines of demons, actual evil spirits, very bad spirits that have used that island almost as a sort of an anchor for them to attach themselves to. And whoever had the misfortune of coming across that island, either A, because they didn't have, let's say, the knowledge of that island and just thought it was just something else altogether to just land upon innocently, or B, they were foolish and knew of that island's reputation, but maybe there was something else there, some long lost treasure, something else that they wanted to take a chance, a risk on, or C, they were in the unfortunate circumstance of getting lost or getting the ship crashed that they were on and then having to get to that island in order to survive afterward. Well, apparently they would run into these horrible spirits that were there, whatever these were, these supernatural creatures, these ghosts, or these demons / evil spirits. That's why it's called the Isle of Demons, because those are all weird, just bad creatures that inhabited that island. In fact, those that knew about the reputation of the island, apparently when it was existing, they knew that whenever they stayed away from it, they would still pass by it, but they would hear these strange sounds, like it was almost like haunting screamings or the type of wailing, and in some cases even shrieking noises that would come from the island. I imagine that they would pass by as far as they could, but they could probably still hear it even from that far away, the sound just passing throughout the entire area, and it would give them the shivers, no doubt, hearing that stuff there. Not only that too, but there's this, and this is why I wanted to link it to the world of MonsterVerse there when it comes to Godzilla and then also Kong Skull Island. Because how about this? Apparently this island was also something that inhabited creatures, long lost creatures that apparently would be nowhere else in the world. They've been described as being hideous creatures as well. And not only did they live on the island itself, but they also cruised along by the waves. In fact, various ships will report seeing these creatures move about. And even though they gave a wide berth between their location and the island's location, these creatures would still be trying to go around their area in terms of their ships in order to be able to, I don't know, attack them or bring them to the island somewhat. But again, that instantly made me think of Skull Island when it comes to not just the Kong film, but also some of the other films too. And of course, the upcoming Kong versus Godzilla or Godzilla versus Kong film, because it'll be featured there. But here you have a huge island that apparently houses all these mythical creatures, all these creatures that who knows how they look like. Nobody has able to describe, be able to describe them in detail or how large they were, but they were absolutely out of this world when it came to their appearance. Not only that, but if you happen to be unlucky enough to be stuck on the island, you also had to deal with more natural predators. This was an island that apparently consisted of bears and also wolves, and then who knows what other type of creatures, more natural creatures, Earth-like creatures, in other words, that inhabited that island. And they all survived there in the island as is. And that's why it not only, again, did it have the ghosts and spirits, but then it had those other creatures, and then the more Earth-like creatures. It just created a very, very bad island to be able to go to. But yes, it's been chronicled throughout multiple centuries. Various drawings have been made. not just from historians, but also novelists have described it too. Apparently, poets and other singers talked about this island throughout multiple centuries. They just talked about it first in a foreboding sense, but they would essentially talk about it. They would talk about its location, and everyone knew apparently that this was an area that you shouldn't go into. And in fact, one of the most notable instances, how about this? There was a real life person, someone who was stuck on that island, and they managed to escape and live to tell about it. So this was very, very fascinating when I was reading this information too. It has to do with a woman by the name of Marguerite de la Roche. I hope I'm saying that last name correctly. Marguerite de la Roche, who apparently was marooned on that island sometime around the mid-16th century. So here's how her story went. I'll just try to tell it as briefly as possible. Apparently, she was on a ship with another gentleman, a guy by the name of Jean-François de la Roque de Roberval. That's a long name, right? Jean-François de la Roque de Roberval, who was traveling over from France over to the New World. And as he did so, he brought her along with some other crew members as well. It's been interpreted as to whether they were cousins or maybe even brother and sister, and then others stating that he was her uncle. It's been interpreted in several fashions, so it's up to you to decide. But the point is, somewhere along the way to that travel in that ship to the New World, this young woman decided to fall in love with someone that was there, one of the crew members. This is an unnamed, unidentified crew member to this day. Probably the most knowledge that someone has is that he was an unskilled laborer, however that defines him. But that she fell in love with him, but this was considered not like a sin, but forbidden. And somewhere along the way, though, this Jean-François, decided that this was so wrong that the next island that they would come upon, he would either drop her there or drop him there or drop both of them there. And again, there's various interpretations on that end too, because when they reached this island, it happened to be the Isle of Demons. I don't know if he knew the notorious nature of that island or if he did so by accident, but either way, they came across this island, and either on one part, it's interpreted that he dropped her off and she was going to be left by herself, but then her lover decided to stay with her. In other words, he wasn't going to leave her, or he was going to drop the lover off, but she in turn didn't want to leave him, or they left them both there. But they also unfortunately left one of the aides that was tied to the young woman, and all three of them were essentially stuck on that island. And somewhere along the way, this lady, Marguerite, she had a child with this unnamed lover, but he and then also the maid, the servant that was tied to them, ended up passing away. I don't know if they died because of something bad that happened on the island or if they died of natural causes. That's apparently lost in history too. And her baby ended up dying as well because of the unfortunate circumstances of either malnutrition or something else happening to the baby on there. But she survived. She actually ended up staying on that island for a good number of years, as it was described, some years, in other words, and she survived by hunting these animals and then living off of whatever she could that the island could provide. But when I was reading this information, I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, like if this is an island that's that notorious, having these demons, having these evil spirits, having these unearthly monsters, having these regular predators there. Here she was, Marguerite, surviving this entire island by herself and being able to do so successfully, so much so that she was eventually found by some other fishermen that happened to come across the island, and she was able to get off of it thanks to those fishermen, and she would tell her tales afterwards. She was able to go back to France, and she was able to achieve some level of celebrity from her status there. So here is an actual 100% noted description of someone going to that island and then encountering several years there within that island and surviving it and living to tell about it and then give her experiences. I don't know if she was able to state like any other information as far as like, let's say, the evil spirits or other creatures that inhabited that island, but I was so fascinating to read about someone having a real life encounter with this island. But as to the whereabouts of the island today, this Isle of Demons, who knows? It no longer appears, of course, on any new maps, like nothing as far as Google Maps or any other type of satellite maps out there. If it did, if it survived, it moved somewhere else, or if it was never there in the first place, who knows? It all ties back to various theories, especially when it comes to this. I was mentioning this earlier, optical illusions. There's the idea that there could have been misinterpretations. Either A, it was more along the lines of a glacier that was seen from far away, misinterpreted another way, or it was an actual island, but it was just temporary. Like, let's say volcanoes took care of it afterward. I was reading a theory on that. Or the changing conditions just eroded the island. It's still there, but it's underwater, essentially. There's that theory as well. And then more on the illusion side is this, either the water itself and the way that the waves, not the waves, I'm sorry, but the way that the sun sets, it makes it look wavy in the background. It distorts the image. And then when that happens, that's actually what happens in most cases with phantom islands. It causes things to appear like they were there, but they actually never existed. I think the term is called a superior image. It's an infraction of an image from a far off distance that makes it look like something is there, truly is there, when it never really was. And so maybe this was more on the lines on an illusion side as to the explanation of this Isle of Demons. If that's the case, though, where are all the stories? Where did all those stories come from as far as these evil spirits, as far as, having these mythical creatures and other type of encounters there? I don't think there's any kind of image or optical illusion that could explain that kind of stuff either, because if it happened maybe like 1 year or 2 years, maybe a couple of years, as far as these kind of stories, that could be passed. But here in this case, something involving multiple centuries of people reporting these encounters makes one think when it comes to the existence of the island. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with this notorious Isle of Demons. Maybe it was there in the past, maybe it's there now, but it still lives to this day, at least when it comes to people talking about it and then sharing their thoughts, just like I am here, as to whether it truly existed and what was there altogether. And what do you guys think about that? The link to a potential real life Skull Island. We've seen that in the Monsterverse, and now we have an example of it here. Who knows? We might have Kong himself living on some island there in the Isle of Demons and just waiting to come out afterward. Not just him, but some of the other creatures too. But if anyone has any more info, anything else I might have missed about this urban legend, please post those comments below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are too, as well as to the existence of this island. So, all right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.